It always starts with a meeting you don't want to be at. For us, it was a mandatory all-hands assembly in the plant cafeteria, the one place big enough to hold all three shifts at once. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and the low-grade anxiety that hums under the surface of any place where men and women trade their time and their bodies for a paycheck. We were standing, not sitting, a subtle power move to keep things brief and uncomfortable. At the front of the room, next to a wobbly projector screen displaying a single obnoxious corporate logo, stood the new plant manager, Barrett. My name is Thomas. At that point, I had given 22 years of my life to this plant. I started on the line fresh out of high school and worked my way up to shift supervisor. I knew the rhythmic clang and hiss of every machine like it was my own heartbeat. I knew the families of the men and women on my crew. I knew who was saving for a new truck, whose kid was starting college, and who was struggling to make ends meet. Our old plant manager, a guy named Henderson, knew those things too. He'd started on the floor just like I did. He understood that the plant wasn't just a collection of assets on a balance sheet. It was a living, breathing organism, and its blood was the loyalty and skill of its people. But Henderson had retired, and in his place, corporate sent us Barrett. Barrett wasn't from our world. He was in his late 30s, with a sharp suit that looked out of place against the backdrop of concrete floors and yellow safety lines. He had a master's degree from some fancy business school and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd been with us for a month, walking the floor with a clipboard and a look of faint disgust, like a health inspector in a restaurant he had no intention of eating at. He spoke in a language of buzzwords and acronyms, talking about synergizing our workflows and optimizing our deliverables. To us, it was just noise. We made things, good things, with our hands. We didn't optimize deliverables. We did the work. That day, the noise stopped, and the message became terrifyingly clear. "Good morning, team," Barrett started, his voice a little too loud, a little too slick. "As you know, I've spent the last 4 weeks conducting a top-to-bottom efficiency audit. Corporate has given me a clear mandate to improve our plant's profitability and ensure we are lean, agile, and competitive in a rapidly changing marketplace." A nervous shuffle went through the crowd. Lean and agile were corporate code for "you're about to get screwed." To that end, he continued, clicking a remote to bring up a slide full of charts and graphs that meant nothing to any of us. "We will be implementing a few strategic adjustments to our operational budget, effective immediately. First, all non-essential overtime is canceled. All shifts will end at the scheduled time, no exceptions." A murmur rippled through the room. Overtime was our lifeblood. It was how you paid for braces, for a new water heater, for a decent Christmas for your kids. It wasn't non-essential. For many, it was the difference between getting by and falling behind. "Second," Barrett said, raising his voice to cut through the grumbling, "we're reevaluating our expenditures on peripheral consumables and discretionary maintenance. That includes a temporary freeze on certain safety equipment upgrades and a shift towards a more reactive rather than preventative maintenance schedule." That's when the murmurs turned to outright muttering. Dale, a grizzly bear of a man who had been running the number 3 press since I was in diapers, spoke up. His voice was a low rumble. "What does that mean, reactive maintenance? You mean we run the machines until they break?" Barrett fixed Dale with that plastic smile. "It means we trust our skilled operators to flag issues as they arise, Dale. It means we stop spending money fixing problems that haven't happened yet." It was the dumbest thing I had ever heard in my life. It was like saying you're going to stop changing the oil in your car and just wait for the engine to seize. But it was the way he said it, the condescending pat on the head in his tone, that made my blood run cold. "I know this is a change," Barrett said, his smile widening as if he were bestowing a great gift upon us. "And change can be challenging, but the message from the top is simple. We need to do more with less." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes sweeping across our faces. He was looking for fear, and he was finding it. "If this team can't find a way to make that happen, I can promise you corporate will find a team that can." And there it was, the threat, laid bare. "Do what I say, or you're all gone." He clicked his remote, the screen went blank, and he said, "All right, let's have a productive day." Then he turned and walked away, leaving 150 people standing in stunned silence. We weren't a team, we were hostages. The fluorescent lights of the cafeteria hummed, and in that moment I could feel the soul of the place just drain out. The unspoken contract we all believed in, work hard, work safe, and you'll be taken care of, had just been torn up and thrown in our faces. We were being told that our safety was discretionary, and our loyalty was worthless. We weren't people anymore, we were just numbers on Barrett's spreadsheet, and he was about to start deleting rows. I looked around at the faces of my crew. I saw shock, I saw anger, but mostly I saw fear. These were good people, hard-working people. They had mortgages and families and lives built around the promise of this plant. Barrett didn't see any of that. He just saw costs to be cut, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this was not just a new policy, it was a declaration of war. He just didn't know who he had declared it on. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of my living room, the low glow of the television flickering across the walls, but I wasn't watching it. I was replaying Barrett's words over and over again in my head. Do more with less. It was the mantra of a man who has never had to do anything, a man who has never had his hands covered in grease, never felt the heat of a furnace on his face, never had to make the split-second decision that prevents a 1,000-pound piece of steel from crushing a coworker's arm. It was the empty gospel of the spreadsheet class, people who believe reality can be bent to fit the cells of an Excel document. My wife, Sarah, came downstairs around 2 in the morning. She didn't turn on the light, just came and sat on the arm of my chair, resting a hand on my shoulder. She knew me better than I knew myself sometimes. She'd been with me since before I even started at the plant. She'd packed my lunches, washed the grease out of my work clothes, and listened to my stories about the guys and the machines for 22 years. She knew the rhythm of my moods, and she could tell this was more than just a bad day at work. You're going to burn a hole in the floor, pacing like that in your head, she said softly. I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. He's going to get someone killed, Sarah. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, and the words tasted like poison. He's calling it peripheral consumables. You know what that is? That's new gloves when the old ones wear through. That's new safety harnesses. That's the budget for the third-party inspector who checks the air quality. He called it discretionary. I shook my head, the sheer idiotic arrogance of it making me physically angry. And the overtime, that's not for fun. That's how Billy on my line is paying for his wife's chemo. It's how young Marcus is affording diapers. What are you going to do? She asked. It wasn't an accusation, just a question. She knew I felt a responsibility for the people on my shift. It's what made me a good supervisor. It's also what kept me up at night. I don't know, I admitted, and I hated the feeling of helplessness that came with those words. I'm just a supervisor. This guy was sent by corporate. He has all the power. You have the guys, she said simply. They respect you, Thomas. Henderson always said you were the real backbone of this plant. I thought back to Henderson. He was old school, a man whose hands were as calloused as mine. He'd come up the hard way, and he never forgot it. I remembered a time, maybe 10 years ago, when the main hydraulic press for the chassis line went down on a Friday afternoon. It was a catastrophic failure, a series of blown seals that was spraying hydraulic fluid everywhere. It was a mess, and it was dangerous. A shutdown would have meant we'd miss a massive shipping deadline for one of our biggest clients, a car manufacturer that was notoriously unforgiving. The penalty clause in the contract was something like $50,000 a day. Henderson didn't panic. He didn't call a consultant. He walked onto the floor, rolled up his sleeves, and said, "Thomas, what do we need?" We spent the entire weekend in that plant, me, Henderson, and a handful of the best maintenance guys. We didn't have the right custom seals in stock, so we ended up machining new ones ourselves in the tool shop. We worked for 48 hours straight, fueled by coffee and pizza that Henderson paid for out of his own pocket. We got the press running by dawn on Monday morning. We met the deadline. The company didn't just avoid the penalty, they got a bonus from the client for our quick work. The next week, Henderson walked onto the floor and handed each of us who had worked that weekend a check for $2,000 separate from our overtime pay. He shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "This place runs because of guys like you. Don't ever forget that." That was leadership. It was respect. It was understanding that your people are your greatest asset, not your biggest cost. Now we had Barrett. The very idea of him getting his hands dirty was laughable. He probably thought a hydraulic press was something you used to make juice. The contrast was so stark it made my teeth ache. I was mourning a time that I hadn't even realized was gone. For years I had tolerated the slow creep of corporate culture, the pointless paperwork, the flavor-of-the-month initiatives. I'd put up with it because at its core the plant was still our place. Henderson had been the shield that protected us from the worst of it. Now the shield was gone, and we were exposed. The next day at the plant was like walking into a morgue. The usual banter and laughter were gone, replaced by a tense, resentful silence. The only sound was the familiar noise of the machinery, but even that seemed to have a different edge to it now, more menacing. The do more with less policy was already taking its toll. Guys were rushing. The little 5-minute safety checks we did before firing up a machine, people were skipping them, not because they were lazy, but because they were scared. Barrett had made it clear that quotas were all that mattered. Miss your numbers, and you were on the list. I saw Frank, one of my best machine operators, trying to clear a jam in the feeder line without powering down the machine completely. It would save him 10 minutes he needed to make up for a delay earlier in the morning. I walked over and hit the emergency stop myself. The machine shuddered to a halt. Frank looked at me, his face a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Thomas, I gotta make rate," he said, his voice low. "Not like that you don't," I said, my own voice firmer than I intended. "You know the rule, Frank. Full power down, lockout, tag out, every time. I don't care what that suit says." "He's the one who signs the checks," Frank muttered, but he went to the main breaker to lock it out properly. I saw the relief in his eyes, even though he was trying to hide it. He didn't want to take the shortcut. He felt like he had to. Later that afternoon it happened. A near miss, a bad one. A forklift driver, a good kid named Stevie, was trying to stack pallets of finished parts higher than regulation to save floor space. Another one of Barrett's brilliant efficiency ideas. The top pallet was unstable. It teetered for a second, then came crashing down, a half-ton of solid steel parts exploding across the concrete floor. It missed a group of guys by less than 10 feet. The sound was like a bomb going off. The entire line went silent. I ran over. Stevie was pale, shaking. "I'm sorry, Thomas. I'm so sorry. Mr. Barrett said we had to clear the aisle." I put a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, son. Everyone's okay. That's what matters." Barrett heard the commotion and came strutting out of his office. He took one look at the mess, the scattered parts, the terrified faces, and his first words weren't, "Is everyone all right?" They were, "What's the delay here? This is going to kill our numbers for the hour." I turned to face him, and I could feel the last 22 years of my loyalty turning to ash in my mouth. "A pallet fell, Barrett," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Almost took out 3 men, because your new policy is unsafe and stupid." His face hardened, the plastic smile vanished. "Watch your tone, Thomas. This looks like operator error to me. Write him up." He pointed a finger at Stevie. "And get this cleaned up. You're on the clock." He turned and walked back to his air-conditioned office without another word. That was when I first saw the look on Dale's face. Dale, the old-timer, the man who had seen everything. He was just a couple of years from collecting his pension, a pension he had worked 35 grueling years to earn. His entire strategy for dealing with management was to be invisible. "Keep your head down, do your job, and they leave you alone," he always said. But as he watched Barrett walk away, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, pure, unadulterated hatred. He caught my eye from across the floor. He didn't say anything. He just gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't agreement, it was acknowledgement. He was seeing what I was seeing. The final straw, the thing that pushed me from quiet anger to cold action, came a week later. It involved Marcus. Marcus was one of the younger guys on my crew, maybe 25. He was a hard worker, smart, with a wife and a new baby girl at home. He was a photo of his kid in his locker kind of guy. He was also desperate. He needed this job, and he knew he was replaceable. He was exactly the kind of person Barrett's new regime was built to exploit. Because the overtime was gone, the only way to meet the new aggressive quotas was to work faster and cut corners. One of the ways Barrett's consultants had identified for workflow optimization was to remove the secondary safety guard on the metal stamping machines. It was a mesh cage that prevented you from reaching into the press while it was cycling. Removing it shaved about 3 seconds off the time it took to place and remove a part. 3 seconds over an 8-hour shift added up. It also multiplied the risk of losing a hand by about 1,000. I had fought it. I went to Barrett's office and told him flat out it was a violation of OSHA regulations. He pulled out a file. According to this, the primary light curtain sensor is the only legally required safety measure. The cage is redundant. It's a legacy system, slowing down production. The request to remove it has been approved. Make it happen. He dismissed me with a wave. I told my guys to be careful. I told them to treat the light curtain like it was a live wire. But I knew it was only a matter of time. Fatigue is a real thing on a factory floor. Repetitive motion for 8 hours straight dulls your senses. That's what the cage was for. It was the idiot-proof, fatigue-proof, fail-safe. And now it was gone. Marcus was on the stamper that afternoon. He was tired. I could see it. He told me during the morning break that his baby was teething and he'd been up all night. He was pushing himself to keep up the pace. I saw him lean in to adjust a piece of metal that had shifted slightly. His hand broke the light curtain and the machine stopped, just like it was supposed to. But his momentum carried him forward. As he pulled his hand back, his arm scraped hard against a newly exposed shear pin on the machine's frame, a pin that had been safely behind the cage for 20 years. It wasn't a life-threatening injury, not like losing a hand, but it was bad. A deep, ragged gash from his wrist to his elbow. Blood welled up instantly, soaking the sleeve of his shirt. He cried out, clutching his arm. We had him in the first aid station in seconds, but the damage was done. It needed stitches. A lot of them. When the official incident report was filed, I listed the cause as the removal of the safety guard. The next day, Barrett called me into his office. Marcus, his arm wrapped in a thick bandage, was already sitting there, looking pale and scared. Thomas, Barrett began without any preamble. I've reviewed the incident report and spoken with Marcus. It seems clear that the cause of the incident was inattentiveness. Marcus admits he was tired. He allowed himself to be distracted. Therefore, he'll be receiving a formal written warning for failure to follow safety protocols. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Failure to follow protocols? We removed the protocol, the one that would have prevented this. This happened because you ordered us to make the machines less safe. Barrett leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. The machine's primary safety system, the light curtain, functioned perfectly. The injury was a result of his own carelessness. The company is not at fault. He turned to Marcus. You understand, don't you, Marcus? You need to be more focused on the job. Marcus, terrified of losing his job, just mumbled, yes, sir. I looked at that kid, at the bandage on his arm, at the shame and fear in his eyes, and I looked at Barrett sitting there in his expensive suit, calmly and deliberately blaming the victim to protect his own numbers. In that moment, something inside me broke, or maybe it was forged. All the helplessness, all the anger, all the frustration of the past few weeks coalesced into a single hard, cold point of resolve. This was not going to stand. I didn't know how, but I was going to burn Barrett's little kingdom to the ground. I would not let this be the new reality of our plant. The war had been declared a few weeks ago, but this was the moment I decided to fight back. I walked out of that office, leaving Marcus to absorb his own unjust punishment. I went back to the floor, but I wasn't seeing the machines anymore. I was seeing a battlefield, and I was starting to draw up a plan of attack. The first step was acknowledging a hard truth. The system was designed to protect the company, not us. Going to human resources would be like reporting a fox to the farmer for raiding the hen house. HR's job is to protect the company from liability. We were the liability. Any complaint I made would be documented, sanitized, and buried in a file, and I'd be marked as a troublemaker, first on the list for the next round of streamlining. No, this had to be handled from the outside. We needed a bigger stick. We needed a weapon they couldn't control. That night, I didn't just sit in the dark. I sat at my computer. I typed in labor laws, unsafe working conditions, and workers' rights. I fell down a rabbit hole of government websites, legal forums, and articles about organized labor. I read until my eyes burned. I learned about the National Labor Relations Act. I learned about concerted activity, the right of employees to act together to address work-related issues. I learned about unfair labor practices, or ULPs, and I learned about the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, the federal agency that enforces these laws. It was like finding a secret manual to the game we were playing, a manual Barrett didn't even know existed. The word union kept coming up. To be honest, it felt like something from my grandfather's time, a black and white photo of men in flat caps on a picket line. It seemed archaic, almost radical. In our right-to-work state, unions were often painted as corrupt, bloated dinosaurs that just siphoned dues from workers' paychecks. But the more I read, the more I realized that the core idea was brutally simple. Together we had power, alone we had none. Barrett could fire me, he could fire Frank, he could fire Dale, he couldn't fire all of us. The plan started to form, not as a vague desire for revenge, but as a clear, methodical process, a silent coup, built brick by brick on a foundation of their own violations. The weapon wouldn't be a single secret or a piece of code, it would be the truth, meticulously documented. Every safety shortcut, every minute of unpaid work, every veiled threat, it would all be ammunition. But I couldn't be a general with no army. This was the most dangerous part. I had to recruit. One wrong move, one conversation with the wrong person, and I'd be out on the street before I could even start. I made a list, not of my friends, but of the people I respected. People who were quiet, competent, and had a core of steel, even if it was hidden. The first person I approached was Miguel, the supervisor from the second shift. He was younger than me, but smart and steady. We weren't close friends, but we had a good working relationship, a mutual respect built on years of clean handoffs between shifts. I asked him to meet me for a beer after his shift ended, at a dive bar miles away from the plant, the kind of place no one from management would ever set foot in. He was wary. "What's this about, Thomas? Everything okay?" I didn't waste time. I laid it all out. The incident with Marcus, Barrett's response, my research into the NLRB. I told him my idea to secretly organize, document everything, and build a case so undeniable that the company would have no choice but to listen. He listened patiently, nursing his beer, his face unreadable. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. "You're talking about starting a union," he finally said. It wasn't a question. "I'm talking about taking our plant back," I countered. "Call it whatever you want. I'm talking about making it a place where a guy doesn't get his arm torn open and then blamed for it." He stared into his glass. "This is risky, man. They'll fire us. They'll shut the whole plant down before they let a union in." "Maybe," I said, "but what's the alternative? We just sit here and wait to see who gets hurt next or who gets fired for being 5 minutes late. Look around, Miguel. The place is already broken. Barrett is running it into the ground. At least this way we fight. We go down swinging." I could hear the passion in my own voice, and it surprised me. I hadn't realized how deeply this had burrowed into me. He finally looked up and met my eyes. "What do you need?" The relief was so profound it almost made me dizzy. "I need you," I said, "and I need Frank." Frank was a machine operator on my shift, the one I'd stopped from clearing the jam. He was quiet, almost invisible, but everyone knew he was the best operator in the building. He never complained, but he saw everything. He was the moral compass of the shop floor. Miguel agreed to talk to him. A few days later, the three of us met in the parking lot of a grocery store after dark. Frank was hesitant at first, but Miguel had laid the groundwork. I showed them my research, the printouts from the NLRB website. I explained the plan. "We become ghosts," I said. "We do our jobs, we keep our heads down, but we watch and we write everything down. We build a fortress of facts." Frank, who rarely said more than 2 words at a time, surprised me. "We'll need a system," he said, his voice low and serious. "It has to be the same for everyone. Same format. So it's all consistent." And just like that, our little conspiracy was born. We created a clandestine communication network using an encrypted messaging app on cheap burner phones we bought with cash. We were a 3-man cell in a silent resistance. We devised a simple, standardized form for documenting violations. It had fields for date, time, shift, machine number, the specific violation, and most importantly, photographic evidence. We called it the log. Our first target was the unpaid work. Barrett had started holding mandatory 10-minute pre-shift huddles where he'd go over the day's targets. These were off the clock. 10 minutes a day, 5 days a week for over 100 employees. It added up. We started documenting it. One of us would subtly take a picture of the clock on the wall at the start of the meeting, then another at the end. We logged every single one. Then came the safety issues. A broken guardrail patched with zip ties instead of being replaced. Photo, log entry. A puddle of hydraulic fluid left on the floor for an entire shift. Photo, log entry. An emergency stop button that was sticking. We'd film a short, discreet video of it failing to engage properly. Every time we were told to bypass a safety protocol to speed things up, we would write down who gave the order, when and where. Our digital file, our black book, began to grow. The hardest part was bringing more people in. We had to be incredibly careful. We'd observe people for weeks. We'd listen to how they talked in the break room. Were they just venting, or was there real conviction in their anger? We started with the people we knew were solid, one by one. Miguel would talk to someone on his shift. I'd talk to someone on mine. We'd meet them away from work, explain the plan, and show them the evidence we were already collecting. The log was our most powerful recruiting tool. When people saw the sheer volume of violations laid out in black and white, their fear started to turn into cold, calculated anger. Our little group grew from 3 to 5, then to 10, then to 20. We were a secret society operating under Barrett's nose. We moved like shadows, communicating in nods and glances on the floor and in encrypted messages at night. The biggest challenge was Dale, the old-timer. He was respected by everyone, especially the more senior guys. Getting his support would be a major victory. But he was terrified. He had 35 years invested in this place and was just 2 years away from retirement. He had the most to lose. He saw us talking in hushed tones and knew something was up. He pulled me aside one day by the vending machines. "Thomas, I don't know what you're up to, but be careful," he warned, his voice barely a whisper. "You're playing with fire. Barrett is a company man. You cross him, you're not just getting fired, you'll be blacklisted. You won't find another job in this state." I decided to take a risk. "It's too late for careful, Dale," I said, keeping my voice low. "Careful is what got Marcus's arm laid open. Careful is what has us working in an unsafe plant for less money. I'm not asking you to join us. I'm just asking you to think about something. When you retire in 2 years, what kind of place are you leaving behind? Is it a place you'd want your own kid to work? Because right now I wouldn't." I could see the conflict in his eyes. The fear was still there, but it was warring with his pride, with his sense of right and wrong. I had planted the seed. Now I just had to wait and see if it would grow. For 3 months, we lived a double life. On the surface, we were compliant, beaten down workers. We did our jobs, we took the verbal abuse, we watched as our workplace became more and more dangerous. Barrett grew more arrogant by the day. Productivity was up, costs were down. On paper, he was a genius. He even sent out a plant-wide email with the subject line, "Crushing our targets," where he took full credit for the new efficiencies. He had no idea that his success was built on a foundation of fear, shortcuts, and unpaid labor. He had no idea that we were meticulously documenting every single brick he used to build his fraudulent palace. Every night, Miguel, Frank, and I would sync up. We reviewed the new entries in the log. The file was getting huge. We had hundreds of time-stamped photos. We had video evidence. We had signed statements from a dozen different workers about being ordered to bypass safety procedures. We had a precise calculation of the unpaid wages for the pre-shift meetings, and it was already in the tens of thousands of dollars. The weight of it felt enormous, both a burden and a source of incredible strength. Barrett thought he was in control. He had no idea that the quiet, powerless men he saw on the factory floor every day were silently building the case that would destroy him. After 3 months of this silent, nerve-wracking work, the time came. We had our evidence. More importantly, we had the people. We had started passing around union authorization cards discreetly, during breaks, in the parking lot after shifts. The response was overwhelming. The fear that had paralyzed everyone 3 months ago had been baked away by the constant heat of disrespect and danger. It had been replaced by a hard, brittle anger that was ready to shatter. When we counted the signed cards, we were stunned. Over 70% of the eligible workforce had signed on. It was more than enough. The first move felt like stepping off a cliff. There was no turning back. Me, Miguel, and Frank took a day off. We didn't tell anyone where we were going. We drove 2 hours to the regional office of the National Labor Relations Board in the state capital. It was an anonymous-looking federal building, all concrete and glass. Walking through those doors felt monumental. We were three ordinary guys in jeans and work shirts about to take on a multi-million-dollar corporation. We sat down with a field agent, a woman named Ms. Alvarez. She was calm, professional, and had an air of someone who had seen it all before. We didn't just give her the signed authorization cards to petition for an election. We also gave her a copy of our log, a thick 3-inch binder, plus a thumb drive with all the digital files. We had organized it meticulously, cross-referencing every claim with photos, videos, and witness names. She started flipping through the binder. At first, her expression was neutral. Then, as she kept turning pages, I saw her eyebrows raise. She stopped on the section about the removed safety guards and the photo of Marcus's injured arm next to the official company write-up blaming him. She read our detailed log of unpaid pre-shift meetings. She looked through the photos of the leaking hydraulic fluid, the broken railings, the faulty equipment. She closed the binder, looked at the three of us, and her professional demeanor cracked just a little. A flicker of something that looked like respect crossed her face. "You've been very thorough," she said. "We will, of course, begin the standard process of verifying the cards and scheduling an election, and based on this evidence, we will also be opening an official investigation into multiple unfair labor practice charges against your employer." Walking out of that building and into the sunlight, I felt 10 pounds lighter. The secret we had carried for 3 months was finally out in the open, in the hands of people who could do something about it. We had fired the first shot, now we just had to wait for the echo. It didn't take long. 2 days later, the official notification from the NLRB landed on Barrett's desk. A secretary in the front office, a sweet older woman named Carol, who we had always treated with respect, gave us the play-by-play later. She said Barrett read the letter, his face went white, and he walked into his office and slammed the door. A few minutes later, she could hear him shouting into the phone, presumably at someone in corporate's legal department. The words ambush, insubordination, and out of nowhere were apparently used quite a bit. The panic began to set in. Suddenly, Barrett was our best friend. He started walking the floor, trying to make small talk, asking about our families. It was so transparently fake, it was insulting. He had a new favorite phrase, "My door is always open." It was a door none of us had ever felt welcome to walk through before, and we certainly weren't going to start now. Then came the professionals. The company flew in a pair of labor relations consultants from a firm in Atlanta. These weren't HR people, these were union busters. A man and a woman, both impeccably dressed, with predatory smiles and dead eyes. Their job was to scare us, to divide us, and to crush our organizing effort before the election. They started holding what they called informational sessions. They were mandatory. We were herded back into the cafeteria, the same room where Barrett had delivered his threat 3 months earlier. This time, the consultants were at the front with a slick PowerPoint presentation. They told us a union was a third party that would get between us and management. They told us we would have to pay expensive dues for nothing. They showed us photos of violent strikes from the 19th. They warned us that if we unionized, the company might be forced to shut the plant down and move production to Mexico. It was fear-mongering 101, textbook stuff, but we were ready for it. In the weeks leading up to filing the petition, we had been in contact with an experienced organizer from a national industrial workers union. He had warned us exactly what to expect. He had prepped us. During the Q&A after one of the presentations, the male consultant asked, "Do you really want to pay a union boss your hard-earned money just so he can drive a fancy car?" Before one of our guys could say something angry and get himself fired, Quiet Frank, raised his hand. The consultant, surprised, called on him. "Question for you," Frank said, his voice steady and calm, carrying across the room. "The 10 minutes of unpaid work you have us do every morning. If you add that up, it comes out to over $200 per employee per year. That's more than the union dues would be. So it seems to me we're already paying a boss for his fancy car. His name is Barrett. At least the union promises to represent us. What are you promising?" The room was dead silent for a second, and then a few guys started to snicker. The consultant's smile faltered. He tried to stammer out a response about company policy, but the damage was done. Frank's simple, factual question had cut through all the propaganda. We weren't the greedy ones. The company was literally stealing our time. The real shift in power came when the NLRB investigators showed up. Two of them, a man and a woman, arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning. They presented their credentials at the front desk and stated their intent to interview employees as part of their ULP investigation. Barrett went into full panic mode. He came rushing out of his office, insisting that he or another manager had to be present for any interviews with employees on company time. One of the investigators, a tall man with a tired but unyielding expression, just looked at him and said, "Sir, that would be witness tampering and illegal intimidation. It would also be another unfair labor practice charge, which frankly you have enough of already. We will be conducting our interviews privately. Here is a list of the employees we'd like to speak with first." He handed the list to Barrett. I saw him scan it. I saw the blood drain from his face. The list contained the names of every single person who had been a witness in our log. It had Marcus's name. It had Stevie's name, the forklift driver. It had the names of the guys who had been told to skip safety checks. He had no idea how we knew. He had no idea how they knew. He thought he was playing chess, but we had been playing a different game all along, a game with federal rules, and he had just been checkmated. He had lost control of his plant. The investigators were in charge now, and they had our playbook. The energy in the plant shifted from fear to a kind of giddy anticipation. The Union Busters' presentations, which had once been intimidating, now felt like the desperate flailing of a drowning man. Their threats about shutting the plant down rang hollow. We knew, and they were starting to realize, that the ULP charges and the mountain of evidence we had would make it legally and financially catastrophic for them to close up shop just to avoid a union. We had them trapped in a corner of their own making. The day of the election arrived, a cool Thursday in early fall. The NLRB set up polling booths in the break room, creating a small, curtained-off space for privacy. It felt as serious as a presidential election. One by one, workers from all three shifts were called to vote. You could feel the weight of the moment. The consultants walked the floor one last time, their smiles gone, replaced by grim, menacing stares. They tried to make eye contact, to offer one last silent threat, but we didn't look at them. We looked at each other. A nod here, a small smile there. We were a united front. I cast my vote, a simple yes checked on a small paper ballot, and dropped it in the sealed box. It felt like dropping an anchor, securing our future. The vote count was held publicly in the cafeteria right after the third shift cast their ballots. Our core organizing committee, me, Miguel, Frank, was there. Dale was there too, standing in the back, his arms crossed, his face impossible to read. On the other side of the room stood Barrett and the two consultants, looking grim. The NLRB agent, Miss Alvarez, unsealed the ballot box and began the count. She would take a ballot, announce the vote, and place it in one of two piles. "Yes," she said. The first vote went on our pile. A small cheer went up from a few of the guys. "Yes," another one. "No," the first one for them. The consultants exchanged a look. "Yes, yes, yes." The yes pile started to grow and grow. For every one vote in the no pile, there were 5, then 10 in ours. It wasn't even a contest, it was a rout. The small cheers turned into a low, steady rumble of satisfaction. I looked over at Barrett. His face was a mask of disbelief. He had been so sure of his power, so certain of our fear. He couldn't comprehend what was happening. He thought he was fighting a few troublemakers. He never realized he was fighting all of us. When the final ballot was counted, Ms. Alvarez announced the official result. 127 votes for the Union, 15 against. The room erupted. It wasn't a wild, screaming cheer. It was a deep, guttural roar of victory, the sound of 150 people reclaiming their dignity all at once. Men were hugging, slapping each other on the back. I saw Marcus, his arm now just bearing a long, pale scar with tears in his eyes. He just kept saying, "We did it. We actually did it." The power in the plant had fundamentally shifted. It no longer resided in Barrett's corner office. It was here, in this room, with us. The company's greatest weapon, the threat of firing us, was gone. They couldn't fire an entire workforce, especially not one that was now federally protected and had a pending ULP case that could cost the company millions in fines and back pay. We hadn't quit. We hadn't walked away. We had taken over. The talent hadn't made an exodus. The talent had unionized and was now demanding its due. In the aftermath, corporate tried one last desperate gambit. They sidelined Barrett completely. He was told to stay in his office and not speak to any employees. The head of HR from the national office flew in. He called me, Miguel, and Frank into a conference room. No consultants, no lawyers, just him. He was a smooth operator with a silver-tongued charm. "Gentlemen," he began, "it seems there's been a breakdown in communication here. A serious misunderstanding. We value you. We value this plant. Let's be frank. This union business, it's messy. It creates an adversarial relationship that nobody really wants. So let's talk about how we can make this right without all the red tape." He then proceeded to offer us the world. He offered me the position of plant operations manager, a significant salary bump, and a hefty bonus. He offered Miguel and Frank lead supervisor roles with similar financial incentives. The implication was clear. Take the deal, help us convince the guys to decertify the union vote, and you three will be set for life. They were trying to buy off the leadership, to cut the head off the snake. It was a tempting offer, a life-changing amount of money. For a second, just a split second, I thought about what it would mean for my family, but then I looked at Miguel and Frank. I thought about Marcus's arm, about Dale's 35 years of service, about Stevie being humiliated in front of his coworkers. I thought about the hundreds of people who had put their trust in us, who had bravely signed those cards and cast those votes. I leaned forward. "We appreciate the offer," I said, my voice even, "but I think you're still misunderstanding the situation. We aren't the leaders, we're just the spokesmen. You don't have a problem with 3 employees, you have a problem with 127 of them. We don't speak for ourselves, we speak for the union, and the union is ready to negotiate its first contract." The HR man's smile finally faltered. He had played his last card, and it was a loser. The power shift was complete. They couldn't bully us, they couldn't buy us, they were going to have to deal with us. The first negotiation session was surreal. Our committee, me, Miguel, Frank, Dale, who had finally and fully come aboard after the vote, and a quiet woman from quality control named Maria sat on one side of a long conference table. With us was our union's professional negotiator, a sharp, seasoned veteran named Dave. On the other side sat a team of corporate lawyers in dark suits, the shell-shocked HR director, and the company's vice president of operations. Barrett was nowhere to be seen. He had been rendered completely irrelevant. They started with the usual platitudes, talking about finding common ground and forging a new partnership. Dave, our rep, let them talk for a few minutes before he cut them off. He slid a thick binder across the table. It was a copy of our log. "We can skip the speeches," Dave said calmly. "Here's what our members have documented over the last 3 months. We can talk about these unfair labor practice charges now, or we can talk about them in federal court. Your choice. But either way, we're going to talk about them." The lawyers opened the binder. The color drained from their faces as they saw what we had, the photos, the videos, the meticulous records. They had come expecting to negotiate over wages and benefits. They were not prepared to be confronted with a mountain of their own documented malfeasance. We laid out our demands. They were not outrageous. They were about justice. First, full restoration of the safety budget to Henderson-era levels, plus a 10% increase, with oversight from a new Joint Worker Management Safety Committee. Second, full back pay for every minute of unpaid work from the pre-shift meetings for every employee. Third, a formal binding grievance procedure that couldn't be ignored. Fourth, a modest, across-the-board wage increase to make up for the lost overtime. The lawyers hemmed and hawed. They tried to bargain, to whittle down the numbers, but they had no leverage. Our evidence for the ULP charges was a guillotine hanging over their heads. A strike, which we were fully prepared to call, would cripple their supply chain. They knew it, we knew it. After 2 days of tense back-and-forth discussions, they caved. They agreed to every one of our primary demands. The contract would make our plant one of the safest and best paid in the region. Then came our final demand. Dave saved it for the very end. "There's one more thing," he said, leaning forward. My people feel that a productive and trusting relationship with management will be impossible as long as the individual responsible for the hostile and unsafe environment that necessitated this action remains in a position of authority. We are making the removal of Plant Manager Barrett a condition of this agreement." The lead lawyer sputtered, "You can't do that. We don't negotiate personnel issues. That's a management prerogative." Dave just smiled, a thin, cold smile. Everything is negotiable when you're facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit and a plant-wide strike. You have a choice. You can have Barrett, or you can have a functioning, profitable factory. You can't have both. We'll give you 48 hours to decide. We stood up and walked out of the room, leaving them to stare at the signed contract and our final non-negotiable term. Exactly 47 hours later, a plant-wide email went out from the corporate VP of Operations. It was short and to the point. "We want to thank Barrett for his service to the company and wish him well in his future endeavors. Effective immediately, he is no longer with the company. An interim plant manager will be appointed shortly." He hadn't been wished well. He'd been fired, sacrificed to save the company from the fire he had started. We didn't cheer. We didn't gloat. We just felt a profound sense of vindication. Justice, cold and clean, had been served. I walked out onto the plant floor. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy with fear. The familiar sounds of the machinery sounded different, not like a threat, but like a promise. The promise of good work done safely, with dignity. Dale came over and clapped me hard on the shoulder. He had a real, genuine smile on his face, the first I'd seen in a long time. "You did it, Thomas," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You son of a gun. You actually did it." I looked out at the faces of my crew. They were smiling back. We had faced down the beast and won. We hadn't just saved our jobs. We had saved the soul of our plant. We had our home back. It's been 6 months since that day. The contract is in full effect. The new safety committee, which I co-chair with Miguel, is active and empowered. We've replaced all the old, worn-out equipment and implemented new training protocols. The back paychecks went out, and for some guys it was thousands of dollars they were owed. Morale is higher than I've ever seen it. The new plant manager is a guy who was promoted from a supervisor role at another one of their factories. He came from the floor, like Henderson did. He listens. He respects us. He knows that his success depends on our success. We are a union shop now, and that's not a dirty word. It's a statement of fact. We are partners in this enterprise, not just disposable cogs in the machine. This morning I was training a new group of young hires. I was showing them the proper, safe way to operate the metal stamper, explaining the importance of every guard and every sensor. One of the new kids was a fully recovered Marcus, who we had fought to get promoted into a junior maintenance role. He was learning a skilled trade now, a career. He was teaching the new kids alongside me, his scarred arm a silent testament to why we fought so hard. He pointed to the restored safety cage. "That thing is your best friend," he told a young trainee. "It's the difference between going home tired and not going home at all." Watching him, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. We hadn't just fixed the present, we had secured the future. We were passing down not just the skills to do the job, but the culture of respect and safety that we had bled for. They thought they could break us. They looked at our worn-out boots and our grease-stained hands and saw weakness. They thought a man in an expensive suit with a fancy degree held all the cards. They thought they could tell us to do more with less, and we would just bow our heads and obey. They forgot the most basic thing. A company isn't a logo on a letterhead. It's not a stock price or a building. It's people. It's the collective skill, the shared knowledge, and the stubborn pride of the men and women who show up every day and make the whole thing run. When you disrespect those people, when you treat them as nothing more than a cost to be cut, you awaken a power you cannot possibly comprehend. When those people decide to stand together, they are no longer a line item on a budget. They are the company. Barrett wanted us to do more with less. Well, in the end, we did. We took the less he gave us, less safety, less pay, less respect, and we did more than he ever dreamed. We built a fortress of truth. We built a union. We took our power back. If you've ever been made to feel small at your job, if you've ever been told your experience doesn't count, if you've ever been undervalued or ignored, let me know your story in the comments below. I really do read them, and it's important to know you're not alone, and if this story meant something to you, please give it a like and hit that subscribe button for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It makes a huge difference. Thanks for your time.